Simon Zeller sat motionless in his high-rise office, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. The soft click of his fingers tapping the edge of his mahogany desk echoed faintly in the room. Sales reports for his pet supply chain were stable. On paper, everything looked fine. But something gnawed at his gut. Store 7, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, had started slipping through the cracks. The numbers didn't make sense. The complaints had come gradually. A misrung sale here, a cold interaction there. But they were subtle, almost forgettable. Nothing that screamed disaster. Then came the latest financial review. It painted a darker picture. High turnover, steep sales decline, and low employee morale. Simon's instincts, honed over a decade of hard decisions and gut calls, screamed that something was off. He stared out the window, lost in thought. "This doesn't feel right," he murmured to himself, a faint tension tightening his jaw. Simon hadn't always been at the top. 10 years ago, he had taken a gamble, buying a nearly bankrupt pet supply chain with just 3 stores. Through grit, long nights, and a relentless drive to build something meaningful, he grew it into a thriving 11-store operation. He'd promised himself from day one that the company would never lose its soul, that employees would be treated with dignity and customers with warmth. But lately, that promise felt distant. Greg, his district manager, had brushed off his concerns. "Just bad hires, it'll pass," he had said with a casual shrug. But Simon had built his success on more than spreadsheets and empty reassurances. Something wasn't adding up. He needed answers, and he needed them from the ground. So he made a bold decision. He would go undercover. Shedding his executive image took more effort than expected. His sharp beard was left to grow scruffy, his tailored suit swapped for worn-out jeans, a hoodie that had seen better days, and thick-rimmed glasses. He became Sam, a new hire fresh off the job market, complete with a fabricated employment record. Since he'd never personally visited Store 7, and most staff only knew him through corporate memos, he had a real shot at blending in. The next morning he walked through the automatic doors of Store 7, greeted by the scent of hay and dog treats mingling in the air. The space was smaller than most of his other locations, but everything appeared orderly. Shelves stocked, lights bright, aisles clean. But beneath the surface something didn't. Behind the counter stood a man in his mid-40s. His shoulders were rigid, his gaze cold and disinterested. "You the new guy?" he asked, barely glancing up. "Yeah." "Sam." "Starting today," Simon replied, steadying his voice. Dale, the manager, gave a grunt and tossed him a name tag. "We're short-staffed. Don't stand around, follow Claire. She'll show you where things go." Claire approached with a half-smile that never reached her eyes. She looked no older than 22, her posture slouched with fatigue. "Hey," she said quietly. "Come on, I'll walk you through." As they walked the store's layout, dog food on the left, cat products in the center, aquariums and small animals in the back, Simon noticed Claire rubbing her wrist absent-mindedly. There was a heaviness in her movements, a weariness beyond physical exhaustion. "You okay?" he asked gently. She paused, masking something behind a strained smile. "Yeah, just long shifts." Simon didn't press, but he tucked it away in the back of his mind. Something wasn't right. The next few hours passed in a strange rhythm. The store ran like a machine, with missing bolts. Employees moved briskly, avoiding Dale's line of sight, like shadows ducking the sun. Dale's presence was oppressive. He barked orders without eye contact, snapped at customers, and when an elderly woman asked about dog food, he sneered, "Read the label." Simon's jaw tightened. That wasn't how his stores were supposed to run. That wasn't what he built. Then came the sound. A faint, stifled sob. He froze mid-aisle. The noise seemed to come from the back, near the break room. Moving slowly, he followed the sound. Rounding the corner, he saw the door slightly ajar. Inside, Claire sat on a plastic chair, her frame trembling as she wept quietly into her hands. Simon stood at the doorway, heart heavy. He had seen employees burn out before, but this wasn't stress. This was pain. He knocked gently on the frame. "Claire?" She startled, quickly wiping her tears and trying to smile. "Sorry, I'm fine." But Simon could hear the crack in her voice. "You don't look fine," he said softly. She hesitated, then let out a breath that sounded more like surrender. "It's this place. I love working with animals, but Dale makes it unbearable." Simon felt a cold knot form in his chest. "How do you mean?" Claire glanced nervously at the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's rude to customers, sure. But with us, it's worse. He cuts our hours out of spite. Yells constantly. If someone complains, suddenly they're barely getting any shifts." Simon said nothing, but inside, the storm had begun. His company wasn't just failing on the balance sheet, it was failing its people, and that was something he couldn't ignore. Simon's hands curled into tight fists, his knuckles whitening as Claire's words echoed in his mind. "I need this job. I'm saving to go back to school, but I don't know how much longer I can take this." Her voice had trembled just enough to reveal the quiet desperation underneath. This wasn't just about difficult shifts or low pay. It was about dignity and the slow erosion of hope. He forced a deep breath through his nose, collecting himself. Blowing his cover now would solve nothing. Not yet. Instead, he met her eyes with quiet empathy and nodded. "I get it. That sounds really tough." Claire offered a small, defeated smile, one that barely masked the weariness etched into her face. "Yeah, but what can you do, right?" It wasn't a question. It was resignation, a choice between enduring the abuse or sacrificing her future. Simon said nothing, but inside, a storm was forming. He already knew what he was going to do. The real question was how far he'd have to go to make it count. As he stepped out of the break room, the hum of fluorescent lights and low chatter returned, but his mind raced. Claire's confession wasn't surprising. It confirmed what his instincts had been screaming all along. Dale's rule wasn't built on leadership. It was built on fear. His staff were surviving him, not working for him, and Greg, either he was blind, or worse, complicit. Simon needed more than feelings. He needed facts. He needed something that no one in corporate could deny or sweep under a rug. Back on the sales floor, a man in his 50s stood by the register, tugging gently on the leash of a small, anxious terrier. Dale was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, his tone already cold and dismissive. "I told you, no returns on opened food," Dale barked flatly. The customer rubbed his forehead, frustration evident. "I get it, I do, but I bought it yesterday and my dog won't even touch it. I'm not asking for cash, just store credit." Simon stood nearby, watching closely. This was a pivotal moment. These interactions weren't just transactions. They were where loyalty was built or broken. Dale scoffed, shaking his head. "Not my problem. Next time, buy a smaller bag." The man's expression hardened. His grip on the leash tightened slightly, and Simon could see it. The exact second the customer decided never to return. "Fine," he muttered, and walked out, his dog trailing behind. Simon clenched his jaw, rage flickering just beneath the surface. There were rules, sure, but there was also compassion, flexibility. A good manager could follow policy while still making people feel heard, feel valued. A single kind sentence, "I understand, let me talk to the assistant manager," could have changed everything. As the door chimed shut, Simon caught Claire's glance from across the aisle. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That evening dragged on like a weight tethered to his patience. Every interaction with Dale chipped away at Simon's control. The man ruled the store like a petty dictator. Sharp glances, sharp words, no room for trust or grace. The silence that blanketed the store wasn't peace, it was fear. No one smiled, no one lingered. They just worked, quickly, quietly, obediently. Then the bell above the door jingled, and in walked a woman with blonde hair pulled tight in a bun and a district manager badge clipped to her blazer. Simon's stomach dropped. Greg. He hadn't expected him to show today, but now he would see the truth, not just in Dale, but in the man who was supposed to oversee him. "Dale, my man," Greg boomed, slapping Dale on the back with the familiarity of old friends. Simon watched Dale's transformation. The slouched posture straightened, the scowl softened into something like warmth. "Running a tight ship as always," Dale said with a grin. Greg nodded with approval, eyes scanning the store with performative satisfaction. "Good. I keep telling corporate this store's solid. No need for any extra attention, right?" Dale chuckled. "Exactly." Simon felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't neglect. This was protection. Greg wasn't just missing the warning signs, he was actively shielding Dale. Simon angled himself slightly toward a shelf, pretending to check prices, keeping one ear trained on their conversation. Greg lowered his voice. "By the way, that new guy, Sam? Keep an eye on him. Last thing we need is another weak link." Dale shrugged. "He seems quiet. Probably won't last." Simon's blood boiled, but his face remained unreadable. No twitch, no flinch. He stepped forward. His voice was calm, but firm. "Actually, I plan on sticking around." Dale's eyes narrowed, assessing. Greg barely gave him a glance. "All right then, keep up the good work," he said, clapping Dale's shoulder again before walking out the door like nothing had happened. Simon stood still, his fingers gripping the edge of a shelf until they turned white. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from white-hot frustration. Greg had just confirmed what he feared most. The abuse wasn't hidden. It was ignored, dismissed, protected. The longer he stayed undercover, the more time Dale had to keep hurting people like Clare. He was nearly ready to pull the trigger, but he needed one last push. One incident so clear, so inexcusable that no spin could save it. And that moment came faster than expected. A woman entered the store, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. By her side trotted a Labrador, wearing a vest marked boldly, "Service Animal." The woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, moved with a slight but visible limp. The air shifted. Simon straightened. "What are you?" This was it. She approached the counter with quiet determination, her step steady despite the limp in her right leg. A service dog moved beside her, trained and calm, its vest a silent testament to its role. The woman's voice was polite, but carried the calm authority of someone used to advocating for herself. "Hi, I was hoping to see if you carry the orthopedic dog beds. I bought my last one here, but I don't see any in stock." Simon, still shelving nearby, turned his attention toward the exchange. He'd seen enough bad behavior for one day, but Dale wasn't done yet. Without even lifting his head, Dale muttered, "What's on the shelves is what we've got." The woman frowned. "Your website said this location had some. Could someone check the back?" Dale huffed, clearly irritated. "I don't have time to dig through the back for one bed." Simon's jaw tightened. The disrespect, the laziness. The woman stood a little straighter, undeterred. "I am happy to wait." Dale let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Lady, I'm running a store, not offering personal shopping service." From across the store, Simon noticed Clare freeze near the stockroom, her eyes wide with disbelief. Other employees continued moving, but it was obvious they'd heard. Everyone had. The woman's hand tightened subtly on the leash. Then I'd like to speak to your manager. Dale smirked, arms crossed. You looking at him? The moment hung in the air, thick, unbearable. Simon had seen enough. He stepped forward, voice even, every word measured. I'll check the back for you, ma'am. Dale spun, irritation morphing into suspicion. That's not your call. Simon met his stare without blinking. It is now. And then, with steady hands, he reached up and pulled the lanyard from around his neck. The fake name tag dropped to the counter with a soft clatter. Dale's face twitched with confusion, then recognition. The shift in his expression, first confusion, then the pale flush of fear, was almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Simon reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it he slid his real ID, laying it next to the badge for everyone to see. His name, his photo, his company. For a moment, the store was frozen. Claire's eyes widened, a sharp gasp escaped from the stockroom, and Dale's jaw slackened as reality settled like a stone in his stomach. Simon turned first to the woman with the service dog. I'm truly sorry for the way you were treated. If you'll give me a moment, I'll personally find the bed for you. She nodded slowly, still stunned by what had just unfolded. Then Simon turned to Dale, his voice low but ironclad. I've been here for 2 days. I've seen how you speak to employees, how you treat customers. You've run this place like a private kingdom built on fear, laziness, and disrespect. Dale opened his mouth, but Simon raised a hand. Don't. No excuses, no stories. You're done here. Dale's voice cracked in defiance. You don't know what it's like trying to keep this place going. Simon didn't flinch. That's exactly why I came. To see the truth you've been hiding. He turned to Clare, whose posture straightened as her name was spoken. You told me you were saving for school. He nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. You shouldn't have to suffer through this kind of environment just to earn your tuition. None of you should. His gaze swept the staff, the fear still evident in their stiff movements. Turning back to Dale, he added, Your final paycheck will be processed. You're to leave the premises immediately. Dale's fists clenched, but the fire in his eyes had faded to cold defeat. He grabbed his coat, muttering under his breath, and shoved the door open with a bang. The moment he stepped out, the tension in the store didn't quite vanish, but something shifted. For the first time, the staff exhaled. Simon turned to Clare with a softened expression. Would you mind showing me where the stockroom is? I believe we have a bed to find. Clare gave a small, stunned nod. Something between disbelief and cautious relief danced in her eyes. Together they walked into the back. The scent of dry kibble and cardboard filled the air. Harsh overhead lights threw long shadows across the concrete floor. Clare pointed toward a high rack. If we have any left, they'll be up there. Simon followed her gesture. He was already thinking about next steps. Firing Dale was just the beginning. Culture, trust, dignity, those took time to rebuild. This store needed more than just management. It needed healing. Claire sifted through the pile and found one. Wedged behind larger beds, she pulled it down and handed it to him. Her eyes, now softer, held an unspoken question. Will it really change this time? Simon didn't say anything yet, but he carried that look with him as he returned to the front. The woman was still there, the Labrador obediently seated at her feet. Simon placed the bed on the counter with care. This should be what you're looking for. She ran her hand over the fabric and nodded. Yes, it is. Thank you. Before she could reach for her wallet, Simon swiped his card. This one's on us. She started to protest, then stopped. Her voice was gentle. Thank you. And with that, she left. The chime of the door felt different this time, cleansing, final. The silence that followed broke in waves. Employees began to murmur. A few smiled, uncertain but hopeful. The chains around their voices had begun to crack. Simon turned to them all. "I want to hear from you. No filters, no fear. What has it really been like here?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then a young man stacking cans near the back stepped forward. "I almost quit last month," he said. "Couldn't handle the way he treated people. Every time corporate called, he shifted the blame. If we were short-staffed, he said it was because no one wanted to work hard. If customers complained, he said they were just entitled." A woman adjusting a product display added, "He slashed my hours without warning. I went from full-time to barely scraping by. No explanation." Their voices began to rise, one after another. Each confession a release, each story a small crack in the old regime. Simon listened, not as a CEO, but as a man who had once promised to build something better. And this time, he would keep that promise, from the inside out. When I asked why, he just shrugged and said, "That's how it is." Simon stood still, absorbing every word. These weren't random complaints or isolated missteps. This was deeper, systemic, a culture of indifference embedded in the store's foundation. Claire crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "I stayed because I love working with animals. It's always been more than just a paycheck for me, but lately, it's been draining, soul-draining." Simon nodded slowly, his tone resolute. "That ends today." He pulled out his phone and began typing, each word a promise in progress. "First, I'm bringing in an interim manager, someone who understands that leadership starts with empathy, someone who values both employees and customers." Around the store, employees exchanged tentative glances, a quiet flicker of hope stirring behind tired eyes. "Second," Simon continued, "anyone whose hours were cut unfairly will have them restored. Going forward, all scheduling changes will come with notice and a reason. Not with." There were nods now, subtle but genuine, the kind that marked the beginning of belief. "And third, starting today, we're launching an anonymous feedback system, ongoing. If something's not right, you'll have a voice. No more fear. No more silence." Claire's posture loosened slightly, the strain in her shoulders easing. "That actually sounds like it could work." Simon met her gaze without flinching. "It will. Because I won't let this happen again." Around him, the atmosphere began to shift. It wasn't celebration, not yet, but it was lighter, less guarded, a store slowly waking up after years of treading quietly. As Simon turned toward the back office, his thoughts shifted. This wasn't just about Dale anymore. Greg had enabled him, protected him, lied to corporate and buried complaints. And if he had done that here, how many other stores were suffering the same silent decay? He had pulled one weed, but the roots could be deeper. Simon opened the door to the office for the first time. The air inside was stale, tinged with the scent of old coffee. Papers spilled across a desk in disarray. A whiteboard schedule hung crookedly on the wall, smeared with dry erase streaks and half-erased names. A perfect visual of Dale's chaos. Simon exhaled deeply and sat. The room was still, but his thoughts raced forward. Removing Dale was necessary, but the system that let him fester had to be dismantled. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a name. Aveline Carter, head of HR. 2 rings, then her voice. "Simon, everything all right?" "No, not yet. I need a full audit of district management, starting with Greg." A pause. "Greg, I thought he had that region under control." "I did too," Simon said, leaning back. "Until I went undercover and saw it for myself." He laid it out. Dale's reign of fear, Greg's interference, and the quiet suffering of the employees. His voice stayed even, but the intensity behind it made clear this wasn't optional. Evelyn didn't interrupt. When he finished, her voice was quiet, but sharp. That explains a few things. Simon sat up straighter. What do you mean? I've seen occasional reports about that store, not red flags, just odd patterns, complaints about scheduling, management tone, but Greg always handled them before they made it to corporate. Simon's hand curled into a fist on the desk. How many complaints? A few each quarter, nothing huge on the surface, but if he was filtering them, then this might not be the only store with a problem, Simon said grimly. A long silence followed. Then, with resolve, Evelyn answered, I'll start pulling records. If Greg's been covering for anyone else, we'll find it. Good. Also, schedule a company-wide meeting with managers and floor staff. I want them to hear directly from me. This culture changes now. I'll handle it, she replied. Then, softer, Simon, going undercover. Most COs would never risk that. Simon exhaled. Then maybe more of them should. The call ended, and for a long moment, Simon stared at the ceiling. His company had grown fast. 11 stores, and plans for more. In that speed, he'd lost sight of what mattered, not just the numbers, but the people behind them. The foundation needed repairing. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Clare peeked in, clutching a clipboard. Sorry, the staff's asking. About what's next? Do we have a new manager coming in? And do we need to worry about Greg? Simon waved her inside, gesturing to the chair across from him. She stepped in cautiously. Greg won't be a problem for much longer, he said firmly. I'm handling that personally. Clare let out a slow breath, tension melting from her face. Good. He always let Dale do whatever he wanted. As for a new manager, Simon said, I have someone in mind for now, but for the long term, I want your input. Clare blinked. Mine and the team's, Simon clarified. You know this place better than anyone. What kind of leader do you need? She hesitated, chewing her bottom lip. Then, slowly, she spoke. Someone who checks in, who asks how we're doing instead of assuming we're fine. Someone who listens. Simon nodded, jotting it down. That's what you'll get. She studied him, quiet. You mean that, don't you? I do. She nodded, clutching the clipboard tighter. All right, I'll let the others know. As she left, the door clicked softly behind her. Simon looked back to the desk, the clutter, the chaos. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Changing culture never was, but it had started. This time he wouldn't let it slip away.